Well, good morning to you. Thank you for being here this morning. We're going to, I don't know, somewhere we've gotten off the slide here somehow. Yeah, got the other right there. There we are. Yeah.
Oops, I'm sorry, I did that.
I'll just hit down here. There we go. All right, we're cooking now. So we're going to take a look back this morning at chapters 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount. You know, we've spent the last few classes discussing this, and we could spend many more breaking it down further. But I think there's a value, and we've tried to do this to this point, of seeing Jesus' teaching kind of as it flows along. And I think seeing it, trying to see the whole thing, the people who were originally listening to this likely heard the whole thing. It wasn't just, pieces here and pieces there. Here's our schedule here for the next few classes. Really, after today, we get into practice of going one chapter at a time. We have a break for our gospel meeting, a few class meetings down the line. So next Wednesday, we'll be on chapter 8 and then going from there. So just looking back, that we had seen that Matthew presents kind of a very structured way of presenting the life of Jesus. It's not just sort of plucking and choosing things, but he's structuring it with these first 7 chapters, announcing the coming of the kingdom, and then with the Sermon on the Mount as this main teaching. And then as you go along, we see additional sections, but each of these emphasizing something about the kingdom. And each section, Matthew includes a kind of main teaching section of Jesus. And so this first section that we've been on, the kingdom is coming, the kingdom is here, and announcing it, revealing it, that's where we are here. And it is interesting, as we have noted, Matthew presents Jesus as the Messiah King, the Son of David, he begins the whole book with. He presents him, especially to a Jewish reader, they immediately begin to see him as this second Moses, as prophesied in Deuteronomy, this prophet that would be very similar to Moses, and as Emmanuel. And this Moses connection, as I've put it here, in many ways, chapters 1 through 4 could be seen like the first book that Moses wrote, the book of Genesis, the beginnings of the life of Christ, the beginnings of the kingdom. And then Exodus, and I think this becomes kind of clear. Why do we call this the Sermon on the Mount? Well, because there's a mount or a mountain involved. And again, us, Gentile readers 2,000 years later, we make out of view, well, this is a bit of a stretch, maybe. But to a Jewish reader, I think they would have, in the first century, they would have immediately gotten that, hey, this is lining up, and what we see then transpiring is a new delivering of the law. The king giving the pronouncements, the new Moses receiving and giving this new covenant on not Mount Sinai, but wherever this was in Galilee. And so, in this, we see here's what he wants the people in the kingdom to be like. Why does he want us to be like this? It's one of those easy but hard questions. Easy, the answer's easy, but sometimes as a teacher you have to fish for it a little bit. Why does he want us to be like this? Well, what is he like? Yeah, this is what he is. This is who he is. He's revealing himself in this, and thereby showing what he wants us to be. What's been the impact of this? As you get toward the end of chapter 7, well, the very end of chapter 7, what was the impact? The people listening said, hey, this is different. That when Jesus had finished saying the things, the crowds were amazed in his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as one of the teachers of the law. It wasn't like just one of the Jewish scribes or even the great leading teachers of the day. In recent years, I've heard Lawrence emphasize this as much, but especially in his first many years here, Lawrence would emphasize, in many ways, the words of Jesus, we talk about evidences. The resurrection is maybe the evidence of who he is. But the words of Jesus, the phrase is, are self-attesting. If he really is the Son of God, shouldn't his words stand out? Well, and his words do stand out. Many people have said many wise things throughout time, most of which reflects some kind of wisdom from God. But is there anybody whose teaching really stands out like Jesus? When people reject Christianity, how many of them truly reject Jesus? It's not easy to do. But beyond the initial readers, over these last 2,000 years, Lawrence has mentioned this book. There are many other things you could turn to, but it's by a guy named Tom Holland, who at least when he wrote the book did not avow being a Christian, a British historian. The book comes about, he said, I watched him on a podcast, he made a trip to Iraq. And he said, being there, he sort of had the idea that, these ideas of how we should behave and how we should treat each other, well, those are just sort of universal ideas. And he said he went there and realized these are not universal ideas. And he began thinking more and more, it's places where the teaching of Jesus has spread farther and deeper and longer. That's where these ideas of how we should treat people who are strangers, how we should treat people who aren't within our extended family or tribe, how we should treat humanity and how we should think about ourselves, the idea that humility is a virtue and not a vice, that even people, and Allah makes this point, even people who would not confess Jesus as Lord live by the principles in many ways that he talks about here. Now, some of them have been, a bit perverted and driven in ways I don't think you would necessarily endorse, but still those reflect this big push in our era for social justice as a political movement. Ultimately, where does that have its basis? It wasn't Tiberius Caesar. It wasn't the Roman Empire. It wasn't the barbarians, Germanic ancestors of many people like us. It was Jesus Christ that talks about the idea of every individual matters. And so this has had an impact throughout the whole world. I found this quote. I want to talk a little bit about the Beatitudes. In many ways, the whole Sermon on the Mount could be plugged in here. But Alfred Edersheim was an 1800s writer. He was a Jew, but converted to Christianity. And he wrote a book on the life and times of Jesus the Messiah that was, and in some ways still is, sort of the definitive work giving the background. It's this thick of all of these interactions of Jesus. Who were the... I don't know how he read all the stuff he read that he includes in this book, but he said this: the Beatitudes present to us not the observance of the law written on stone, but the realization of the law, which by the Spirit is written on the tablets of the heart. And so, look back through, I don't know what happened to Blessed are the meek there. It got lost. I don't know. There we go. I decided I didn't think meekness really deserved to be in there. So, well, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek or the gentle. Blessed are those who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness or justice. Blessed are those who show mercy. Blessed are those who make peace. Blessed are those who have pure hearts. Blessed are those who, when they are treated badly for doing good and are insulted for believing in Jesus. I noted last Sunday, in many ways, I think this can be viewed as not Jesus predominantly in saying these things, this is how you need to be, but instead thinking of this as Jesus walking among this very diverse group of people and looking at people and saying, blessed are people like you who mourn. Blessed are people like you who are hungry and thirsty after righteousness. Blessed are a lot of people that are marginalized in this Roman Jewish society, but who God sees favorably. But with that said, does that mean there's no, this is how we should be to this? And I was talking with someone last Sunday after class about the Beatitudes, and they were making a point, and I think it's a good one, that these attributes that he seems to be reaching out to people, where do we see these reflected then in his words of the rest of this speech? So my question is, for instance, blessed are the poor in spirit. Where, and if you have a Bible with you, if you're just glancing through chapters 5, 6, and 7, where would you see those words, not exactly, but ideas similar to those words reflected in this is how you should be? Yeah, and many of these might fit different things, but be careful about judging others. What about blessed are those who mourn? Well, I don't know, and especially in Luke's gospel, that he's referring, he doesn't make it clear to the people there that he may be talking about mourning over sin. He seems maybe even to be including people who are just mourning. But remember, some of you, if some of the Old Testament scholars in here, Isaiah 66, who's going to build me a house? Heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. The one to I look will be the one who is poor in spirit, and you remember, I may have to ask, this is digging deep here, and has a contrite heart. In many ways, Jesus is echoing the very words of Isaiah 66. The people who are looking and understanding the seriousness of their sin. People who are looking for forgiveness. And so where Jesus talks about forgiveness, that relates. What about hungering and thirsting for righteousness? You get over to chapter 7, Sterling covered this. What does he say? Those who seek will find. Those who are searching, they're going to find it. I've put a list here that, again, some of these could go with more than one of these, but blessed are the poor in spirit. Be careful about looking for the blank. Look for the blank in your own eye. Those who mourn, forgive our debts. Those who are meek and gentle, don't judge others. Those who are hungry and thirsting, the one who seeks finds. Those who show mercy, don't judge. Or if you forgive people that have sinned against you, make peace, turn the other cheek, have pure hearts, not doing things to be seen by others. Again, these are just a sampling, but to give you an idea that the very things he seems to be reaching out to the people he's speaking to, then he turns into the very things that he says, this is how you need to be. This is the character I'm looking for in people. And so it's interesting, the Beatitudes, I think Sterling may have mentioned this, I can't quite remember now when he was introducing this, but like I said, this Moses connection, we turn to Exodus 20, and in Exodus 20, we get the Ten Commandments. And they begin with this preamble, if you will, and then the Ten Commandments. The Beatitudes, well, you could argue that's not exactly 10, but more or less, I think, plays the role of that we see the Ten Commandments in the Exodus 20, but it has a preamble that's put after the Beatitudes. This thing about salt and light. You're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. And I came to fulfill the law. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I have come, and again, different versions render this a little differently. I've come, don't think I came to abolish the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill them. This version says, I've come to accomplish the law's purpose. I was reading this morning. One verse that said, I came to give the law all of its sense. I came to fill out what the law was about. I think is a good way to think about it. That, what does that mean? Well, he's the embodiment of the law. That, he says things like, anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Did Jesus live by this rule? I mean, here he is, the master of heaven and earth, but was he just constantly going around? He certainly indicted people here and there, but he didn't diminish the value of people. He raised up. That's what he's doing here at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, raising up the value of people who would have been devalued in their society. He says things like, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throwing it away. Now, again, it's hard to fit that into Jesus because he doesn't stumble. But Jesus seems to guard himself against stumbling by doing what sorts of things? Yeah, by knowing God's word, a lot of prayer, fasting. I was joking with, everybody looks back to normal. I don't know how many of you joined in the fasting. We did that. Lawrence had sent out the little note about, hey, don't use this opportunity to whine and complain. I said, Lawrence, if I'm fasting, I'm whining. Those two things are just going to go hand in hand. But, it is interesting how often Jesus prays and does things like fast and goes off by himself. His 12 most of the times wondered, why is he going on by himself so much? But it seems to be a means of accomplishing this renewal. He says things like, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 with them. Says, I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Talk about Jesus embodying this. But again, this is embodying the law. This is what the law was trying to push people toward, as we talked about last week. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Don't do your good works. Be careful about doing good works to promote yourself. I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough to food and drink. if you want to say something really challenges us, well, there you have it. Don't worry about your life. Instead, do what? Trust in God, who takes care of birds, who gave us flowers that don't do anything for themselves, but yet are beautifully adorned. He says things like, the standard you use in judgment are the standards with which you'll be judged. Do to others whatever you would like them to do to you. And then again, this is a sampling across these 3 chapters. So, if we take these sorts of things together, is the Sermon on the Mount about setting up rules and restraints, or is it about grace and forgiveness? And the answer to that is yes. Yes to both. Does Jesus lay out, boundaries for our lives? Well, certainly. And yet, throughout all of this, it isn't just, boundaries that don't do this, but it's about boundaries that emphasize helping and doing good.
One of the things Moses says in Deuteronomy 4 is, if you embody the law in this way, other nations are going to look at you and say, look at that wise nation. And Jesus says, at the end of chapter 5, you're going to be perfect, just as your Father is perfect. And so it's the end. This is the end that God always seems to have had in mind.
Yeah. I mean, think about, again, Jesus as living out the full purpose of the law. Well, Jesus embodies both limits, boundaries, and yet fully embodies grace and mercy and forgiveness. Also, what about, is this about understanding the old covenant better, or is this expressing a new covenant? Well, and you'll probably be catching on now to what I'm doing. Well, again, the answer is yes. Yes, I think in chapter 5 particularly seems to be expressing, hey, here's how you've heard the old law interpreted, but here's what God was really after. But in doing that, I think he's really, and we've said things. Jesus says all the law hang on love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. It's all summed up with phrases like do unto others as you would have them do to you. And yet we can also see Jesus, however you want to say this, in clarifying and drawing out and making explicit things that were, I think, built into the law of Moses, but were not spelled out so clearly. Lots of things were spelled out, but they seem to be missed the point. The law against murder was not just not to kill people, but was there to do what? Recognize people matter. God values people. Why give a law against murder? Well, because God values every soul and every individual. And that's what they had not been seeing. And so Jesus is drawing out and making much clearer in his kingdom something that was already there. And so, yes, I think one could present that it's both explaining the law better and raising this to a new level and delivering a new covenant. Well, what about character? Is Jesus speaking to people and saying, you people that have this character, you are in God's favor and you're in his kingdom? Or is he saying, here's how you need to adapt and change to be part of his kingdom? Well, again, yes, I think both of those seem to be the Beatitudes. And then what he says after this seem to be doing both of those, reaching out to people who are like God wants them to be, but also saying, hey, we're not all doing this, and we're not all doing this completely, and this is how God wants us to be. there's many different film versions and TV versions of Jesus, but in one of these, I think it has a couple of the 12 asking Jesus. He's giving them a little preview of the Sermon on the Mount, and their sort of reaction first is, well, Jesus, these sound kind of harsh. Pluck your eye out and don't do. And he says to them, I'm not trying to give a sentimental speech here. And then his next phrase I thought was very good in this rendering was, should I just say to everybody, hey, keep doing what you've been doing the last 1,000 years. That's been working out really good for you. And now he could come back and think 2,000 years later and say, well, in the world here, everybody just keep doing what feels like you should do internally, because that's really going to work out great. And so, yes, one can use this as an expression toward a world, any kind of world, that begins to just listen to itself and follow its own rules, or follow the rules that the desires that crop up within us internally. And Jesus is saying that is going to lead to a very messed up world. Here are kinds of things. And to the extent the world has gotten better, again, back to the impact thing, to the extent that individuals are valued more in the world, that's a reflection of this. The fact that people would have care for people that aren't in their tribe or in their family, that's an expression of this. So no, if your internal thought is, I only care about my family. Well, Jesus is saying you need to adjust your thinking. You think, well, I don't really care about other people. Jesus is saying, every person matters. And so, yes, and Lawrence has been on this quite a bit, so I won't work it over too much. But, I think most of us can sense, and I think in some ways the world in general can sense this thing of, just listen to yourself. It's nonsense. It's, all right, I'll get off that. Well, but he also puts in here this continuing backdrop. Throughout chapters 5, 6, and 7, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, or the lawyers, the teachers of the law, and the Pharisees, you'll in no way enter God's kingdom. He's kind of setting up a contrast. Here's a kingdom that seems to be related to God's kingdom, but is really headed in the other direction. And, that becomes clear in chapter 5 as he works through, you've heard it said, but I say it becomes somewhat clear in chapter 6 when he then refers to them as hypocrites. It's not quite as clear, but it's certainly implied in chapter 7 when he says things like, well, don't be judging in this way. Or not everybody that says to me, Lord, Lord. Again, I think this is throughout the whole thing, you have this running background of the scribes and the Pharisees. And here's the kinds of things, and we've already emphasized this, that he says, here's how I want you to be. You need to be humble, contrite, teachable, and searching. Again, these things said in the Beatitudes. You need to be valuing and loving people, even people who are hostile toward you. That's a very high challenge for any of us. In your religious acts of devotion and worship, you need to keep safeguards within yourself so that they are really for the praise and glory of God and not for your own praise. You need to be cautious about judgments. You need to be introspective, self-examining, looking for what am I missing. You need to be listening and obedient, but obedient to this full message of Christ. So again, if we started down the line here, he says, here's the righteousness in my kingdom that I'm looking for. How does, for instance, the first one, instead of being humble, contrite, teachable, searching, what would have described the scribes, the Pharisees? Right, self-righteousness. We're better than others. We're looking down on others. Prideful, self-righteousness, condescending, self-satisfied. What about the idea of valuing, loving people, even hostile people, even people we might view as our antagonists, people who are against us? Well, they were very much, and I think this is in many ways characteristic of them, that they saw all of the restraints, they saw the boundaries, and we've talked about, they had boiled it down to 600 and something rules, but they lost sight of the fact that even the law itself was trying to encourage an understanding of mercy. This whole sacrificial system wasn't just a system of rules. It was a system pushing people to see their need for mercy and forgiveness. We sometimes talk, and much of what the gospel writers talk about, the scribes and Pharisees, focus on their traditions. And you see that reflected in chapter 5, this you've heard it said, and other sections. But Jesus here both deepens and widens this critique of the scribes and the Pharisees. It's more than just. It includes this reliance and building of traditions that rise up to and maybe exceed the importance of Scripture itself. But there are other things, and he kind of gets at this. He contrasts the religious acts he's looking for. They were doing this for other people to see. They weren't cautious about judgment. They were quick to judge, not really self-examining. And we see this played out through other gospels. What stories kind of point to this sort of hyper-judgmental, non-merciful view of their world? When you think about interactions Jesus has. Yeah, the healing on the Sabbath. They're worked up because you're carrying your mat. And here's a man who was crippled and could not walk for years. This tremendous thing has happened, and you talk about fixating, in this case again, this comes not just from law, but their view and interpretation of the law, but fixating on the rules and not seeing the goodness and mercy and grace here. It's just sort of mind-boggling. What about, when Jesus is invited to the house of this Pharisee named Simon? And this woman, she comes to him in what state? Broken, mourning. Blessed are those who mourn. You're not mourning over your life and your sin more than washing somebody's feet with your own tears and your own hair. Humble. There's nothing more humble I can think of than this. And yet, what's Simon's view? Well, if Jesus really knew who she was, he wouldn't be letting her touch him. And Jesus turns it back on him and essentially says what? Those who think they need to be free, I'm adding a little paraphrase here, but think they need to be forgiven little, love little. Those who understand they need a lot forgiven, love a lot. What's essentially saying to Simon, you don't have any idea how much you need to be forgiven. There's no real self-examination. And again, this comes chapter 5 here. They're very precise. They're thinking, we really are masters of the law. We're very precise. We've got the 600 rules. We've got all sorts of interpretations around those rules. As they were referred to, we built a hedge around the law. But actually, as you work through chapter 5, as we pointed out last Sunday, what have they done? They've actually ended up narrowing the law and what it was really after. Yeah, they're really emphasizing, well, don't murder. If you're not murdering, you're good. And Jesus saying, no. If you're saying, you stupid fool, you're devaluing people. And the law is trying to get you to value people. And so we see, again, this run, and these are some examples, this running contrast. And so I want to ask us, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, and I really want to say this in a way that makes an appeal to all of us. Many of us here are very religious. We're very convicted and interested. We're here Sunday after Sunday. And when we hear someone get on the topic of the Pharisees, like, okay, those are bad people. And if we bring that to apply to me, like, whoa, like I said, that's a bit like calling someone a Nazi. It's an inflammatory term. Many, many years ago, I spent one summer preaching in San Diego. And not long after I was there, I'd gone back to school and had heard that, a preacher there had preached a series on, the Pharisees and making application. And the question that arose among some of the people, why would he even do that? Why would you preach a series on the Pharisees? I'm like, the Gospels are full of them. You think about it. Matthew and the Holy Spirit through him goes to great lengths to bring these people in. We first see them in chapter 3. They form this backdrop to chapters 5 through 7, and they keep coming up. Why would that be recorded for us to read 2,000 years later? Well, the point here is not to point at wag fingers, say, oh, you're being a Pharisee. The point is for us, what are my tendencies? What are my blind spots? What are my weaknesses? And I think, broadening this out from just them, I think many people who are oriented toward being very serious about reading the Bible, about religion, are susceptible to some of the issues that arose with them. And so the questions I want to put to us from this is, what really dominates, directs, or characterizes my life? And kind of following that up, do I emphasize the law and obedience, but give much less emphasis to grace and forgiveness? And maybe I emphasize grace some for myself, but do I emphasize that for others and how I treat others? Would someone look at my life and my actions and come away thinking, hey, I really have emphasized grace and forgiveness along with the idea that there are boundaries for us? When I read, as you get into chapter 7, you need to hear and obey the things I'm saying. Do I think about that obeying includes loving those who don't love me, being cautious about judgments, being self-examining, putting my trust in God rather than worrying about tomorrow and other things we see? Or do I mainly focus in on, here are the rules for collective action for churches, and we got to obey that? This obedience that you're talking about is, in fact, in the Sermon on the Mount, and Paul's writing and John's writing is almost all about personal thinking and behavior? Am I very judgmental and maybe even condescending toward others who don't see every Bible teaching just as I do? And maybe even toward those who demonstrate deep faith. And Jim Ward and I were teaching Providence Prayer a few years ago, and during that class, he came to light that in Iraq, there were people being beheaded because they confessed the name of Jesus as Lord and wouldn't recant. And whether it was them or it might be their child or their spouse, that if you don't renounce Jesus, we're going to behead your spouse. Well, what do you think about it? Do you think, well, that's sad that happens, but it's, too bad that they're not really followers of Jesus? Well, what does that imply about where I think I am? Do I think I really have it all right? And Jesus is just like the COVID booster? I just need a little extra Jesus, get me over the hump. But even more to the point here, do we really want that to be the standard of judgment meted back to me? That someone that takes their faith to the limit, oh, that's not good enough. And so, again, those are just questions we could ask ourselves. Thank you for your good attention. I hope we've helped present some of Jesus' great, great words here in a way that's helpful.